All right, Chris. Chris, where are you from originally? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Los Angeles, California, Inglewood. But whenever I talk about it, I say that I grew up in Denver, Colorado.
Why is that?
Well, born in LA, I left maybe when I was 5 years old, 6 years old. It's hard to kind of put the pieces together at this point, but uh, going into the details of the story a little bit, once I was born, I was born addicted to heroin first and foremost, and my parents were living with my grandparents, and it was very short lived. By the time I was 5 years old, I flew out of a vehicle and I broke my neck and smashed a big chunk of my skull out. And when I was helivac to the hospital, my father, I guess he got away or he was temporarily held. And within 3 weeks, I was taken out of the hospital by my father and we moved to Denver. So I consider my hometown Denver, Colorado because of that early move.
I'm afraid to ask now. Tell me, what was your childhood like?
Childhood, I, for lack of better words, it was fucking chaos. It was absolutely crazy from day one. As I just mentioned, alluded to before, I was born addicted to heroin. Obviously, I don't remember what that was like. My mother was actively using when she was pregnant with me, and the first couple of years in LA in Los Angeles were kind of a blur to me. The only thing that I do remember is that moment that I slipped out of that vehicle. We were driving a pickup truck, and my parents were both, drugged up while they were driving. And I thought as a little kid it would be a good idea to reach into the back, outside the window where our dog was, Tyson. And in the process of putting my arm out, I flew out of the window on I-5 and smashed my head against the highway. And helicopter ended up picking me up. Ambulance came, and I do vividly remember a lady stopping, in a Jeep, saying, "Hey, are you okay?" And even as a kid, I kind of thought to myself, "Wow, what a weird fucking question to ask somebody who just flew out of a vehicle." Um, so from there, going to the hospital, I was taken out prematurely, and I later learned from my mother's brother, so my uncle, that I guess, technically kidnapped me out of the hospital because he didn't want to go to prison, and we moved to Denver, Colorado. And in Denver, Colorado, things just got tremendously worse. I mean, it was between abuse. My dad was in a biker gang, and he had a big, as much as I hate to admit this, and embarrassing as this is, a big swastika tattooed on his chest, and which just attracted so much hate, so much trauma into our lives. I watched my dad get shot in the chest because of a gang-related incident. Um, they were back and forth to the methadone clinic, and the friends that would come over would abuse us, physically. There were sexual abuse at times, and it was a very difficult 7 or 8 years that we lived. My brother and I do have a brother as well, and it was crazy. I mean, in 1995, I watched my mom die. So it was early in the morning. We woke up, and they were at the methadone clinic. They were going at, I don't know, 6 o'clock. And my brother and I woke up, walked into the living room. They just got back from the methadone clinic, and everything was normal. And next thing we knew, my mom's face was blue, purple and blue. My brother went outside and dialed 911, and that was it. People were running around in the house. Some guy was smacking my mom on the face to wake her up because there was people doing drugs in there, and it was just that's just an image that I'll never be able to get out of my head. And 2 years later, my dad died. He committed suicide, from drugs, a deadly mixture of drugs. And at this point, I was in New Jersey. I was very fortunate that I had met, at the time, would be my guardians, and I was living with them temporarily while my dad got his shit together, basically. And during that time, they kind of pulled me into the living room and said, "Hey, your dad, he's dead." So it was just I didn't get to talk to him. I didn't get to go to a funeral. It was just all very kind of instantaneous, and I got back to my normal life. And that's kind of the breakdown of the childhood. I mean, a lot happened in between there. There was a lot of drugs, there was a lot of abuse, a lot of moving, foster care. When we went back and forth a couple times to California. And to sum it up, that's kind of the trauma side of the childhood.
You graduated high school?
So yeah, I did. So at the age of, well, 1998, I was in New Jersey. I ended up going to school in New Jersey with my guardians. My brother ended up moving back to California to be with my dad's sister. And I ended up graduating high school. Education was extremely difficult for me. I failed classes. I felt really like a piece of shit in school because I didn't go to school when I was with my parents. We were running around the city. We were, CPS was chasing us around. So I was really insecure about high school and education in general. But I did finally graduate in 2005. And today, I mean, I'm very passionate about education today. I have a bachelor's. I'm going to have, hopefully a master's soon.
Good for you.
And it's something that I'm very passionate about today. But education is really hard for me. It always has been.
So your story is very different than the majority of other stories where they had upbringings kind of similar to yours.
Yeah.
Because you did not get into all the crazy drugs and self-destructive behaviors.
Right. It's, I wake up in the morning sometimes and I wonder, like, how am I alive today? Right. I mean, it's hard to contemplate how I got to this point, because if people look at me today, I'm just a business person. I'm really successful in tech, and I've got a great career, a great family. I did go through trial and tribulation with drugs in high school, right? I did some drugs and I experienced all that because during that time, mentally, it was hard for me because I thought that's what I was, because that's what I saw from my parents, right? I was very, and I always say this now, I feel like I'm very fortunate and I'm resilient. And I can get away from the thought of doing, drugs, and I've been very dedicated to not doing that stuff. So yes, I mean, to your point, I'm a very rare example, at least in my opinion, of somebody who's made it to this point, who's built success, or is alive, frankly, or isn't in prison. I mean, I think my, what do they say? I think my lucky stars every day, right? I mean, there's definitely, in my mind, there's a higher power. There's no doubting it.
Have there been any rough patches in your adult life that maybe are an aftermath of that?
Yeah, I mean, most of my struggles today are centric around mental health and how I process things. It wasn't until I was in my early 30s that I figured out that I had PTSD and I experienced a lot of the symptoms of it, disassociation and, derealization, some of these things I didn't know anything about because I never had support figuring it out. I mean, today I'm much stronger. I have a lot more self-awareness and emotional intelligence, and I understand what I'm going through today. But through my 20s, I had a lot of rough patches. I would quit jobs. I didn't feel like I was worth being successful. I would sabotage relationships. I would treat people like, trash because I wanted to keep them out of my life. And to me, it just all seemed normal. And none of it was normal, right? So, and today I know that, of course, but, so I still have struggles today. I mean, more mentally, emotionally processing things, but I have tools today to manage it, which is the difference.
Have you seen therapists?
Yeah, I do see therapists still. I see a therapist once a week. I think talk therapy is really important. I think it's really important to articulate, what's going through your mind, whether that be through talk therapy or through, friends or, some kind of professional service, right? So I believe in it, but I didn't for a really long time because I just kind of thought I was going insane and didn't think that talking to somebody could help, And, today I take medication as well. It's like Zoloft, antidepressants, I was wildly against them for a long time. And I'm not really sure why, to be honest with you, but they've changed my life, So I have the tools now. I feel like I'm more stable to be talking about how I feel and more productive and, support my family and kind of move forward in a positive way in my life.
Did you ever feel loved when you were a kid?
No, as a kid, I really didn't feel like there was support. I didn't feel like there it. I felt like what I was going through was normal, as weird as that sounds. I felt like seeing all of this chaos and moving constantly, and seeing the biker gang people show up and the drugs, and I thought all that was normal. But I never got the impression that I was really supported as a kid, and I didn't at the time realize that that wasn't normal, right? So I would say all in all, I didn't feel supported, and we were kind of running the streets as a kid, and what I've learned today is it's just built tremendous survival mode for me, right? And I was in survival mode. I look at my son today, who is 7 years old, and I think my kid's 7, and when I was 7 years old, I had already broken my neck, falling out of a truck. I was trying to find food on the streets of Denver, and I can't imagine what it would be like for my son, who gets upset if I'm not there for 5 minutes to go through that, right? So having a kid is kind of a reflection. I look at myself and I think, wow, like my parents really just didn't give a fuck about what was going on. And that's tough to swallow, man. Like that's a hard pill to swallow, and not to say that they didn't love me, because I'm sure, addiction's crazy, right? I mean, obviously I've accepted what has happened and I'm empathetic at this point, but it's still hard to say. Yeah.
So today you have a partner and you have a child?
I do. I have a wife. We've been together almost 15 years, and I have a 7-year-old, and we live in just a nice little kind of rural town in Pennsylvania. And I just try to live a really quiet life today. And I still talk to obviously my adopted mom, who later on adopted me, which I'm very fortunate for. So yeah, I feel like today is just a lot more normal than it was, 20 years ago or 25 years ago.
Where do you think you get the capacity to live a normal life now, given the childhood you had?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I've spent a lot of time and energy on is figuring out the things that are going through my head. And one of my biggest issues has always been intrusive thoughts. I always, for many years I would think about just horrible things, right? And I just thought I was going crazy, and I've invested a lot of time, money, and energy into understanding my feelings, if that makes sense. So I think the fact that I'm invested in myself today is allowing me to live a normal life. And when things do come up, when I get into depression or I have anxiety or I go into disassociation from PTSD, my body gets real shaky, I understand it today, which allows me to not solve the problem, but I can deal with it, and I can deal with it in a productive way. And outside of that, I just think I'm really lucky. Maybe, biologically, chemically, something in my brain has been shaped or molded to be more effective maybe than some other people, and I'm very fortunate for that today.
Do you see any like self-destructive behaviors or anything like that stemming from what you went through as a kid?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any, like physical, self-destructive. I never hurt myself. I never thought about hurting myself, but I have, in the past, have been really self-destructive with my success and with my relationships and my emotions. Figuring out, this, what do they call it? There's the syndrome, imposter syndrome, and things like where you just feel like you're not worth enough for what you're getting. And that's been really tough for me because I came from literally living in a shithole rat nest fucking heroin house to being a really successful, technology salesperson that's been selling to the government for 16 years, right? And there's a lot of days I wake up and I'm like, wow, this is not normal, I need to leave my job and go back to what I'm supposed to be. That's the hardest part for me today.
So your biological dad was a biker with a swastika tattoo. and your mom was a heroin addict.
Yeah.
These are your biological parents. Do you see any kind of hereditary traits that you might have from them? Because you seem pretty straight-laced right now.
No, there's not really a lot that I can relate with them on. I mean, if anything, to be honest, one thing that, especially the racism aspect of it, has taught me, I'm almost grateful that he lived that life, because it taught me just how fucking sour it is, right? And how bad it was and how negative it is to hate other people for no better reason than they're African American or Asian or whatever it is. You know, I hate to say that I'm grateful for that, but it taught me so much today, right? And I've been able to get involved in different ways, you know, with nonprofits, and I'm more passionate about it. But I will say that I look back like at my mom, and my mom was a very calm and collected person despite being, you know, a heroin addict and, you know, not fully there. And I do feel like I have some of her more kind of laid back and, you know, more decisive traits that she had, even though she couldn't kick the struggle with drugs. But outside of that, no, I mean, I have completely disconnected myself from my biological parents, and I don't want to have those traits, right? I mean, if anything, I've just learned from it, and that's it. And hopefully it'll just stay that way.
What was your favorite memory as a kid?
Man, that's a really tough one, because there was just so many terrible ones.
What was your worst memory as a kid? Maybe that's a better question.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give both. I mean, I think some of the worst, some of this is just really hard to say. One of the worst memories I have is actually like a sexual assault situation, where we were living next door to a predator, and we were, you know, my parents were partying in our little apartment. It was on Cherokee Street in Denver, Colorado, and the people next door were partying, and it was a weekend, and one of the kids was 18 or 19, said, "Hey, come over, we're having a party," or whatever. And so my brother and I, young, kind of naive, walked in, and next thing we knew, like, the door was shut in this little apartment that they were in, and the kid pulled out a knife. And, you know, I don't want to like get into the weeds of what transpired, but that was probably one of the worst experiences that I can recall, that I just think about, and I still kind of have that image burned in my head, you know? And from there, my dad, you know, we ran out shortly thereafter, and my dad went downstairs, like we had a little basement, and he grabbed a gun, you know?
Your dad found out?
Oh yeah, we went over, and fortunately it didn't go as far, you know, we were able to get out before it got really bad. And we went, I said to my dad, I was like, "Hey, you know, this guy is trying to molest us, basically." And he went downstairs, he grabbed a gun, and the kid ran out. And all I know is, you know, my brother and I walked out, and he was chasing him down the street, just, you know, blowing rounds off at him. And it, you know, he ended up going to jail. My dad ended up going to jail for, I want to say, 3 or 4 weeks because of that. And to this day, I have no idea what happened to that guy. And it's just, you know, so there was really no closure there, right? I mean, is he still around? Is he not around? Just a really horrible situation all around. You know, and you know, for the best, I think, as a kid who had nothing and was really just trying to figure out what the next day was going to look like, some of the best memories I have, is, you know, as fucked up as it sounds, are, you know, my brother and I, who I'm still very close with today.
He's older or younger?
He's a year older than me. He lives in California.
How's he doing?
He's doing good. I mean, you know, we live completely different lives, but he's doing good.
But he's not into drugs or anything like that?
He's not into drugs. You know, he's got a daughter. He's out in California, Northern California, and
it's great.
You know, we still talk to this day. And, you know, the best memories I have, and I'm sure my brother will appreciate hearing this, is, you know, just him and I going out together to the park right there on Capitol Hill in Denver, and going to the churches at like 5, 6, 7 years old to pick up sandwiches because we were hungry, right? And I think about that, and I think about him and I just kind of walking together, having that bond of survival, and it just calms me down. I mean, it's just such a warming feeling to know that we had each other, right? And I can't even imagine what I would have done had I not had a sibling.
If you were an only child, it would have been really tough on you
to go through that. And we still have you know, we're much different people today, but we'll never lose that bond, right? I mean, we'll never lose the bond that we have because of that.
And Chris, what would you say is the most important lesson you've learned in your life?
Man, the most important lesson to this, as I sit here today at, 36 years old and reflect just kind of on my entire life and being, one of the biggest lessons that I still think about today is just the importance of seeing the light at the end of the tunnel, if that makes sense. And just,
Hope.
there's been so many times, hope, right? There's been so many times that I've gotten to the point where I'm like, man, like, is it really worth being here? And I just felt so dark, and just that one tiny bit of hope that I had, one tiny bit that, okay, someday I can have a family. I'm going to get through this, right? This dark phase of misery in my head where I feel guilty about everything, or whatever it is, the symptoms of the depression, the PTSD, whatever the fuck it is that I'm feeling. Many times I don't even know. That's part of the issue. Just that little glimmer, like, I'm going to get through this at some point. And that I attribute to me just being alive today, and just kind of sticking through it and fighting through whatever it is that I'm going through. And I am so grateful that I've been able to do that. And I don't think enough people have that ability, because there's such a lack of support and resource to people who go through that. I mean, you walk past a homeless person on the street or ask them for money, and get the fuck away from me, right? Like, you don't know what the story is. So there's just this natural desire that we've built as a society to just kind of disregard those people. And I don't know how I came through that, but I did. And, I hope as a society we change that someday, honestly.
Great talk. Chris, thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I'm glad you've survived and thrived.
I am too. And for anybody who needs just a little glimmer of hope, just as cliche as it sounds, it does get better. So.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks.